Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. My name is Jesus Nava. I'm the Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities, and it's great to be here with all of you to talk about volume. It's our technical analysis series, and I thought that we needed to highlight some of the studies that are part of the TradeStation platform in the area of volume and open interest. Before we get started on the application or the platform, here are some important disclosures. Keep in mind that every symbol or idea that we talk about is for educational purposes only. It is not a recommendation of TradeStation. Also, that active trading is not suitable for everyone. It should only be done with risk capital. And that past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. We need to be aware of the risks. The link right there on the PowerPoint slide, www.tradestation.com/important-information can give you those details, okay? Let me switch over to my TradeStation platform and start talking about volume, all right? Let's go here to apps, click on chart analysis, and we're going to go down the list of the different studies that are provided in volume so that we can understand them fully. I'm going to go here to studies and click on add study. And if I scroll down to volume, you're going to see that we have a whole bunch of volume studies. So let's go ahead and try to understand, what are the differences between them and what is each one of these trying to tell me. Let's start off with volume, and at the same time, I'm going to add. I may couple them together so that we can, talk about the same style volume. And this looks very similar to my volume AVG. So volume and AVG are the very first two that I'm going to be adding to my screen. Okay, and as you see, the volume studies don't look right. And the reasons for that is because I had the euro dollar up here on this chart. This says Forex, and Forex doesn't have any recorded volume or volume that we store. So that's why it looks like a flat line. But let me change the symbol here to something that has a volume. I'm going to go here to Microsoft. Okay, perfect. So this is Microsoft. You can see how the two studies that I added at the bottom look very similar. The only difference between the two is the color, and one of them has an additional line running through it, like an orange line, the one at the bottom. The one at the bottom is showing you the average. So that orange line is just averaging volume. But let's try to understand, the numbers that you see here on the far right. This number in red matches the number in blue because they're both plotting the same type of volume. They're both showing you the number of shares that have been traded on this current bar. When I say this current bar is important because when we look at volume, we're not showing you here volume for the full day, but only for the most recent bar, the one that's being built at the moment. And you can see how that volume increments as we speak. So that's because trading is happening for Microsoft, and it's just adding all those shares that are being traded. Historically, you can see how volume is distributed on each one of these 5-minute bars. You can see how volume has this very characteristic bowl pattern where you see volume kind of low in the middle of the day, and then it kind of spikes up at the beginning, at the end of the day. That's very common for stocks because there's usually more trading activity at the beginning of the day and towards later parts of the day. But you can see how those spikes are represented throughout all these days. Take a look at what happened though today and yesterday. So today is Friday, yesterday was Thursday. The opening bar is the only one that has a big spike. That's the very first red bar that's right on the dotted line. That's how the day started. But after that, I see a significant drop in volume at the beginning of the day. We don't have that gradual, decrease of volume. Like over here on the data that happened on the 27th, this is the 27th of July, usually volume has this gradual decrease as new bars join the day. That happened yesterday, didn't happen today. So volume seems to be out of the ordinary today on the low side, if I may add. And you can see that very well reflected on this volume indicator right below. The orange line is a volume average, and you see that the majority of those histogram bars are somehow below that average. So very lightly traded, and that's the nice thing about having indicators such as the volume average, that you can see where the current volume stands in when compared to the average. So it's an interesting kind of concept. The volume average right now, if you see it here on the far right, is 294,000 shares. What does that mean exactly? Well, we could say that Microsoft trades an average of 294,000 shares every 5 minutes. Now, that is a massive, massive amount of shares trading every single 5 minutes. And those are characteristics that you're able to discover about these instruments like this. In this case, this is Microsoft, how actively they trade. And you can make comparisons between one instrument and another by looking at how much they trade in average. Okay, so that average is a 50 bar moving average. The averages in TradeStation, most of the time they will use bars so that depending on the time frame that you're using, you get an appropriate average. So this is a 5 minute chart. If I were to change this to a daily chart, let me go here to time frame and daily, you see how the numbers change. And you can see that in average on a daily time frame, Microsoft trades about 28 million shares a day. Now, each share of Microsoft is $278. So if you multiply that by the total one, we're talking about a massive amount of millions of dollars, right? So it's incredible. It's incredible the amount of money that is moved in the stock market. And this is just one of the, over 10,000 symbols that exist. Of course, not every symbol is going to be actively traded as Microsoft, but there is a ton of movement of cash if we look at volume traded versus the price of each one of the shares. But these two studies, volume and volume average, they're plotting, volume per bar. Volume AVG gives you a little bit more information, it's my opinion, because it gives you the average, and it also gives you a color-coded volume. Color-coded volume, meaning that if you see a blue bar, that means that it's a volume that closed on a higher price. So it takes a look at the price of the candles, and if you have a price or a candle that is closing higher than the previous one, we color code that volume in blue. So we consider that up volume because the security closed higher than the previous bar. And of course, the opposite happens. If the closing price of the candle is lower than the previous one, then we're going to color that volume red. Okay, so I'm glad that we cleared that out. Most of the time I use volume average because of that fact. It provides me additional information as to where the volume is headed. Very rarely I'll use volume on its own unless I just want a monochromatic type of volume like the volume study provides you, okay? Let me remove this one and just concentrate on the volume average for now. The average is an input that we can all modify. If I double click on any of these bars, I can change the average length, which is defaulted to 50. So we go back and think, okay, it's 50 bars. So if I put the study on a daily time frame, yes, that's an average of 50 trading days. If you want it to be more sensitive to what's happening right now, of course, you can reduce that and say, well, I want to do 23 days. 23 days is about the number of trading days that are in a month. If you take out the weekends, we are left with about 23 days. So if you want to have more like a rolling monthly average, we can change that to 23. And you can see that, of course, the average changes. And we see a pattern here. I'm not sure if you see that pattern of the average just coming down. It's like on a downtrend since right here, this high that happened back in May. Since May, the average has been gradually going down and down. Not every single day, of course. These are not consecutive downs, but you can see that overall, it seems like the trend is of the average is going down. What does that tell you? I'm not sure. I'm just pointing it out. There's something visual. I think we all do this. We look at a chart and we see things that stand out to us. Okay. Um, one more thing. Volume. Let's go back here to a 5-minute chart. Okay. Volume is also something that you can change in regards to how it's read. Right now, we're looking at the number of shares, but that's not only the type of volume that there is. If you want to see the number of times Microsoft is traded, then that's also a sign of increased activity. Of course, if it's high, sometimes there's the question, okay, what is it that you want to look at? Do you want to look at how many shares have been traded? Or do you want to know how many people or how many traders are coming in to trade Microsoft? It's just it's just a question. It doesn't have a right or wrong answer, but a lot of times, we want to see how many people or how many traders are coming into the game to trade Microsoft. And the only way to read that is by looking at the number of transactions. Why? Because yes, you see an average of 187,000 shares traded here, but that could be just one institutional player, one institutional trader that is coming into the game and putting in one order for 100,000 shares of Microsoft. Because it happens. These are big institutions that can trade that amount. But that's just one trade. It's important for us to take a look at that as well and see when these big players are putting their trades into the market. But that's not the same if we say, oh, there is 1,000 traders trading 100 shares each. Now, if we say that there's 1,000 trader trading 100 shares each, that's the same size. We're talking about 100,000 shares of Microsoft, but on one side you have 1,000 traders. On the other side, you have one trader, one institutional account. So I'm just saying this so that you can keep your eyes and your mind open to different ways of approaching volume and how we can use it in our advantage. In TradeStation, as I said before, volume, when you first insert it, is going to show you number of shares, but you can change that to number of transactions. All I need to do is go here to data and edit symbol. We have to do it from the symbol side. So edit the symbol. And on an intraday, remember, this is only available on intraday. If you try to do this on a daily or a weekly or a monthly, the feature is not available. But on an intraday basis, you can ask TradeStation to show you, instead of trade volume, here's the setting for volume use, trade volume, we can ask TradeStation to use tick count. And that's the difference. We're not keeping track of the number of shares, we're keeping track of the number of trades. I'm going to click OK. Take a look at the number over here on the right. We are not on what we saw before. I think we were a little bit over 100,000 shares. Now the number is 983. What that number means is that in average, there are 983 trades every 5 minutes for Microsoft. That's an interesting statistic. On the current bar, the bar that's building right now, we have 469. So again, we can see that behavior of volume being below the average. Well, at least, this is the average. We didn't change the setting back to the default. So I think the default was 50. We changed it to 23 because we were looking at a daily time frame. And we said if we drop the weekends, we're left with 23 days. But here in an intraday chart, it doesn't really fit the explanation, because 23 bars of a 5-minute time frame, we're just talking about 100 minutes, maybe an hour, and almost 2 hours of data, which is okay, but just be mindful of the setting that we put in there and what it represents for this 5-minute chart. All right. PSK, I've asked John Brook, who manages the work area inside of TradeStation, about more advanced volume profile studies. And this is something that we talked about. And he said that there's so many different variations of looking at volume that it would be tough to provide one that everybody likes, you know? I'm more of a, on the side of just, you know, providing something that is better than what we have, and then decide, or have, you know, our users decide if it's something that works for you or not. Then not having anything and just leaving it up to our users to come up with interesting ideas on how to plot volume. So just to answer your question directly, are there any plans? Not at the moment. Not at the moment. You know, I don't think we're working on a volume profile type of study. There were many variations on the Trading App Store, but since we terminated the support of the Trading App Store, those are gone. So the only option you guys have to look for something custom is to go to the Easy Language library inside of the TradeStation website, instead of the forums. That would be my recommendation, to just go there and look for volume profile or market profile and see what you can find there. Okay. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and take a look at, so we talked about changing the volume read between number of shares to number of ticks. If I come over here and I change the time frame to daily, we can see the actual, you see on daily, it doesn't give you that. As I said, you know, we come here to daily and you can see we're back on the shares. And if we go to data and go to edit symbol, you can see that that volume settings grayed out, because on a daily time frame, you're only going to see number of shares. There's no tick count on a daily chart. Now let's go back here to a 5 minute, because I want to show you something. This is a 5 minute chart. Volume is set to tick count, as you can see the numbers on the far right, but you can also set the time frame to tick count. Notice how here there's a 25 ticks. Let me set it to 25 ticks and take a look. So my volume study looks very flatline. It's because we have the volume set to tick count. So every time that it trades 25 times, it's going to go to the next candle. And you can see that behavior happening very quickly here on the far right. You can see that on every bar, as soon as it reaches 25, it goes on to the next bar. And to a certain extent, you can see the speed in which Microsoft is racking up its 25 ticks. Sometimes, you know, it takes seconds to reach those 25. Sometimes it takes a few more seconds to reach it. Right now, since we're in the middle of the day, you know, the activity is kind of slow, but as you approach the close of the market, or if you're looking at this at the beginning of the market, this would be continuously going up to 25 very quickly. All right, but it does give you a sense of speed. It does give you a sense of how active Microsoft is. And also, whenever there's more volume, of course, you're going to get more candles. Let me squeeze my chart a little bit here. And let me give you an example. I'm gonna do a higher tick count. I'm gonna do a 1,000 tick. If you guys remember, we were looking at a 5 minute, and our volume set to tick count said that in average, it trades about 900 times every 5 minutes. So this would be sort of the equivalent of a 5 minute chart, but set to tick count. You know, that's the way that I do it. I go to I look at the volume average, set to tick count. I see how many trades happen every 5 minutes, and then I use that as my time frame here. I round it up or round it down most of the time to have an even number. So this is a 1,000 tick bar of Microsoft that is going to build a candle every time that it trades 1,000 times. I want you to take a look at how long it takes to do that at the very beginning of the day. You see the timestamp on the very first bar is 9:30 and 31 seconds, which means that it took 31 seconds for Microsoft to trade 1,000 times at the beginning of the day. What's the timestamp on the next bar? 9:31:42. The next candle took about 1 minute and 12 seconds to reach the 1000. Does that make sense? So the timestamp, remember that it's the closing time of the candle. So you can have an idea on how quickly the instrument racked up that number of ticks. Of course, towards the middle of the day, that's going to take longer. Notice here we're running on the current bar. Let me look at the one close to noon. All right, so here we have the 11:54:30. The next bar is 12:03:56. So from 11:54 all the way to 12:03, it took all that time to rack up those 1,000 trades. Now that's almost 10 minutes of wait to close the bar. From this one, the 12:03:56, we have a 12:09, so about 5 or 6 minutes length. So you can see the difference between the beginning of the day and something like the middle of the day, which means that you're going to get more candles when you have higher volume, which is so interesting that we can create these types of charts because they are sensitive to trading activity. The more people come into trade and put in their trades, the more active the chart will become and the more candles you'll see. When it slows down, of course, the chart will slow down, which is different than a 5-minute. A 5-minute is created with the same time break. Every candle is 5 minutes, and every 5 minutes you'll get a new candle, regardless of how many shares or how many people were trading it. So it's not very representative of activity. And a lot of times, if you're interested in volume and how people are trading it, maybe these are types of charts that you should be looking at, okay? The same happens if you come over here and change it to a share bar. We don't have share examples here, but I can say, give me a 1 million share bar. Now, this is an interesting combination because you can see the time frame up here. I had to type it in because we didn't have it available in the dropdown. This is 1 million share bar. So the chart will wait until Microsoft trades 1 million shares to go to the next candle. You see how many we have here? So on the very first candle, it took about 3 minutes and 21 seconds. But as we get closer to noon, we're talking about 20 or 30-minute difference from one candle to the next to rack up the 1 million shares. So if we're creating a 1 million share bar, what is being displayed down here? What you're seeing is number of transactions. So right now, the blue says 4,740. So far, there's been 4,742 trades in this candle. So we don't know how far up it's going to get. We do know that it has to be around 1 million. So once it accumulates 1 million shares, which is the interval that we specified, then it'll close the candle and go to the next one. So if we look, for example, at the very first candle of the day down here, you can see on the data tips that the volume bar, the number that you see right there in blue, is 3,095. So it only took 3,095 trades to generate the 1 million shares. Of course, that's different than what's happening right now. We're getting close to 5,000, so you can see the difference. Now it's taking more trades to reach that 1 million, but it's going to be, fairly similar. You can see that at the very beginning, we probably had more trades that were bigger. Maybe those were the institutions or mutual funds that were putting in their trades for Microsoft, and that's why it doesn't have as many trades as the bars, later. But in the average, we can see the average right there. We have 5,281. That's the average per bar. So it takes about 5,000 trades in Microsoft to reach the 1 million shares traded. Interesting facts, and you can take that 1 million divided by the trades and you have an average trade size. So pretty cool, huh? So let's go ahead and take a look at the other volume indicators that are here before we end the class. Let's go here let's set this back to a 5-minute. Let's do it at 30 minutes so we can get a little bit more of historical data. So this is a 30-minute chart of Microsoft. I'm going to go to studies, add studies. Let's take a look at, since these are all in alphabetical order, let's take a look at them like that. So we have volume puts, volume calls, and then all options. Let me take these three first. Those are options related for Microsoft. And we have Microsoft here on the chart. So if we put these three indicators, it'll give us data for Microsoft. Now, you can see that something broke. I get the event log and doesn't tell me what happened though. It says option field value is unavailable. For some people that is confusing, but if I look at my studies here on my chart, they're kind of flat. Now, this doesn't seem like it's options data because we would have numbers higher than 1 or 2, not what we see here on the chart. The reason for that is because these indicators are designed to look at daily bars. We don't have, for these indicators, the volume activity on an intraday basis. We didn't say that in the error, but I think that if you open up the easy language for any of these, it'll say it at the top on green letters. No, it doesn't say. This is plots the volume for all options, both puts and calls on a given underline. Also plots a moving average of this value. That's interesting. Okay, so let me go back here to TradeStation and change this to daily. Once I change this to daily, I see the volume reflected as it should. Now, let's take a look at some of the values here and how these indicators are different from one another. Volume, all options, of course, this is traded volume. This is not open interest. This is traded volume for Microsoft on a daily basis. So right now, 372,000 options have been traded for Microsoft. Now, if we want to split that up into puts and calls, just to have a look inside the bias of the market, are the trading more puts or are they trading more calls? If you look at that volume split up, you can see that calls are right here at 206,000, and then you have puts down here at 166,000. So yes, today there's more trades on calls than there are puts. Is that telling you something about the market? Well, it could. Here we see 3 consecutive daily bars. In fact, 4 if we take into account the down bar, but we have 3 consecutive daily bars that are closing higher than the prior one. So that could explain the reason why the call volume is higher than the put volume. I don't see a lot of options activity. Notice that it's gradually coming down. So as the market goes up, you can see that I'm not sure if there's a relationship on the uptrending markets, but it seems like every time the market uptrends, volume tends to come down a little bit, at least on the options world. So I'll leave that up to you, to make some correlations between volume and what's happening to the market. But the fact that we can bring in this data into our chart, I think it's impressive, and we can use that also in some custom calculations if we need to do so. If we add up the puts, in this case, 166,000 plus the 207,000 for the calls, you should get exactly the total number, 373,000. So you have the option to see it all combined or split up into puts and calls. In addition to that, we have 2 other indicators that provide you an additional calculation on puts and calls. It's a little bit, interesting. Let me put those on the screen. They're both oscillators. Here we have some weird data. Everybody sees that volume study down here. There's a big spike. I think that's some incorrect or bad data. It shouldn't look like this. Let me go to Apple instead. What's going on here? I'm not sure why this is looking the way it is. Let's look at something else. Let's look at Twitter. I mean, it could be. I'm not saying that the data is wrong. It just looks like it shouldn't be like that. Let's go to IBM. Hmm. Okay, but Microsoft has that weird spike down here. Most of the time we see values around 40, 50, but over here we have a drop of 19 million. That's why it's so off. I would have to figure out what happened there. But if you want to know the math behind any of these studies, for example, if you're looking at all options oscillator, what is the oscillator telling you? Well, if you go to the easy language of this oscillator, this is it's using a function called price oscillator. But take a look at what's doing inside of it. It's adding the put volume plus the call volume. So it's using that information for the calculation. But what is the price oscillator doing? Let's right click and open up the function for the price oscillator. And if you look at the price oscillator, it's creating an average or a fast average and a slow average. So it's taking the puts and the calls, adding them together, but then it's creating two averages on that data, a fast and a slow. And what the oscillator is doing is creating a difference between those two moving averages. So yes, you'll see moving averages crossing over and crossing under because one is fast and one is low. And you can take these crossovers as an indication of something shifting in the market. On the TradeStation side, when you look at the study, yeah, that line will cross zero and come back under zero. And you can see what that implies in the market. So recently you see that cross to the upside. Not sure if it's a coincidence, but you can see that it correlates with that upswing or that 3 consecutive up bars for Microsoft. This is kind of alerting to me. This number should not be here. I would probably have to have our market data services look into that to see why we have that big of a spike. It doesn't seem that it's right. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but it doesn't seem that it's right. So I would have something double check on that. Okay. But this is the rate of change. So rather than creating an average, let's take a look at the easy language for this. So this is using the function rate of change, but take a look. It's adding put volume plus call volume. And the rate of change, if we open up the function, is taking that amount and comparing it to the amount the day before, so length minus 1. So it's going to try to see the change in that put call volume from one day to the next and plot that as a percentage. So that's exactly what you see here is the rate of change. All right. So that's why when you see numbers of 19 million, it just sounds odd. There must be a bad tick somewhere there. All right. Let's remove this, go back into studies, add studies. So we looked at all the ones that were options related. Here's one that's called the volume colors and volume custom. The ones that say with AVG and with AVGJN, I think those are ones that I've modified, but we should have something that says volume custom that allows you to modify it to plot volume in different ways. But let's take a look at the volume colors. If you look at the inputs of volume colors, it's designed for you to specify the colors that you want to see. So up color criteria when the close is greater than the open, and down color criteria when the close is less than the open. Up color, it says up color default, down color default. So let's take a look at this indicator. This is what it looks like. Let me make the thickness a little bit more for all the lines. I like my lines thicker, especially when I'm doing presentations, and set it as a default. So this is what the indicator looks like, and you can change those colors if you want. That's what this is designed for. Now, the indicator or the volume average indicator that we looked at the very beginning of the presentation is exactly this same indicator. This one just has a little bit more flexibility as for you to decide which color you want to use for up, which color you want to use for down. Another interesting thing, and this is something additional, on the volume average indicator, the one we saw before, it was looking at the closing price of the candle to determine if it was up candle or a down candle. But in here, you can change that criteria and see and compare it to its own. So for example, when ticks are higher than the prior bar, then we can color it differently. Let's say up color. So we see ticks greater than ticks 1 bar ago. And we use the same formula for this one, for the down color. We just change the operator to less than. Then click OK. So now it changed the color criteria. As the volume is going up, it paints it green. When it comes down, it paints it red. So it's comparing volume to itself. So different than the volume AVG, the one we looked at the very beginning, that is hard coded. That is only comparing the closing price of the candle. But if you want to color code the volume, comparing, the current volume to the prior volume and painting it green or red based on that, then this is the study that allows you to do that, the one that's called volume colors. Okay, but I think that's all that it allows you to do. It's an additional study called volume colors, but very similar to volume AVG. Volume custom looks like this. Let me change the style to a little bit thicker. This one right here, the volume custom, and I think, at this point, TradeStation can combine these features, and instead of showing it, or instead of calling it volume custom, I would just call it volume and replace the one that's already there. The volume study in TradeStation, the one that's called volume, it's very simple. It looks very similar to this though. In fact, when you add them, they're going to be exactly the same. This one though gives you a little bit more flexibility. And I think that flexibility should be in the regular volume study. It shouldn't be called volume custom, right? So if I come over here and I double click on the study, oh, come on. It's going to format window. Okay, so, there we go. If you go to the inputs, you have ways of changing what you want. So look at the inputs, it's ticks or trade volume, which means that you have to enter a 0 or a 1. 0 for ticks or 1 for trade volume. So that's the default trade volume. That's what you see down here. If I change that to 0, notice that we see is trade volume. So again, just a matter of changing the inputs here. The second input is up, down, or total. So 0 for up, 1 for down, or 2 for total. So the default's 2, but you can change it if you want to see up volume or down volume. So again, we have those separated in the list of studies. If you look at volume, let me go back here and change it to what it was. If you go back to studies and you go to add studies, we also have, volume down and volume up, which is technically the same thing. So all those that type of flexibility, I would just combine it into the regular volume. That way you don't have an extensive list of studies that are all volume, and sometimes it creates a little bit of confusion, okay? This study though, looks a little bit different in Radar Screen. I think we've talked about this. In fact, that's the one that I've modified in the past. But if you go to a Radar Screen, and I add a list of symbols here, let's add the Dow Jones, and I add that volume custom study that we looked at. So volume custom, let's add it. So this will give you data on a 5-minute time frame. So you see, let me change the symbols to daily. You can see that it changes volume. So you can see how many ticks have been up, how many ticks have been down, the total number of ticks. So you have volume up, volume down, total volume. Okay, so it's an interesting way of looking at volume as well. This can be modified, and I think that's where That's where we decided to make some modifications because sometimes we wanted to see an average, we wanted to see some color coding. So those are types of things that we can add to the study. But this is an overall type of study that provides all sorts of different volume metrics. Let's go back here to the list of volume studies. So we talked about custom down, volume oscillator, and volume rate of change, and volume ratio. These are very similar to the oscillator and the rate of change that we saw for options, for the volume options indicator. But it's, of course, calculated on volume, not options volume, but just regular stock volume. So notice how the oscillator looks very similar. If we were to open the easy language code for each one of these, you're going to see that it looks very similar. Is using a volume oscillator function. And if we open that up, we can see that it's the average of volume minus the average of volume. So it's creating two different moving averages on volume and then creating a difference. And that's what we see here. And for the volume rate of change, similar calculation. Look at the volume from the prior bar and see what the change in volume has been from one bar to the next. Now the volume ratio here is kind of blank. Why is that blank? Let's take a look. I'm going to go to, is the volume ratio designed for intraday? Yep, that's what it is. Notice that this is backwards. Instead of only being designed for daily, it's designed for intraday volume ratio. What is this indicator telling us though? Let me open up the code and take a look at the ratio calculation. So the ratio is upticks minus downticks divided by the total ticks and gives you a ratio. So as the oscillator moves above zero or below zero, you know that you have more upticks than downticks. So it's a nice way of looking at who has the strength here, the upticks or the downticks. So interesting way of looking at volume. I think that's it. That's all our volume studies. You know, we have one here that says JP. I think that's only for our parent company, Monex. They're in Japan, and that's why the letter's JP, but it doesn't apply to us. But these are a whole bunch of studies that are related to volume, which gives you flexibility of seeing volume in so many different ways. Do you want to create one of your own? Of course, that's the way to go if you want to use volume in your analysis, because you can modify it and make it look the way you want. But don't start it from scratch. You can use any of these and modify them in any way that you guys would like, okay? That's it. Thank you guys for joining me today. This is our last class for this week. I want to wish you a very nice weekend, and I hope that you come back recharged on Monday for our 12:30 session in the masterclass. I'm going to be posting the schedule early next week, so keep an eye on the calendar. It's going to be sent as a coach alert. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon. I'll see you guys later. But goodbye.